interview with A. James Hickland, May the 14th, 1981. Interviewer Clarice Weaver. Subject Glendale Inn. Mr. Hickland, we wanted to talk today about the Glendale Springs Inn. You were the former owner of the inn, and I believe you have some good information for us.
I hope so. In 1888, a deed was made out on December 25th of that year in Washington, D.C. from M. Virginia Adams to D.W. Adams, her husband. And M. Virginia Adams was the daughter of Dr. James Calloway, who was one of the founders of Ashe County, one of the founding settlers, his family was. They owned most of the eastern part of the county, and the deed covered a vast area from the eastern ridge of the Blue Ridge Parkway to Obed's Creek, north to the North Fork of the New River. Approximately 50,000 acres of land. It was not very specific in those days, and so it was general boundary areas. Originally, we thought, based upon the memories of people who lived in the area, that the building was built in the spring of 1895, and that's what we notified the State Archaeological and Historical Preservation Section. However, we recently discovered that it was not the spring of 1895 that the original structure was built. It was in the spring of 1892. It was a single-floor building at first and was called the Glendale Inn, although at that time Adams, who was an entrepreneur throughout the western part of North Carolina, wanted to start off as a general merchandise store. And once he'd had 2 or 3 years under his belt, to convert it into an inn. But he started off calling it the Glendale Inn. In 1902, the second and third floors were added to the original structure, as well as the north wing of the building. A post office, United States Post Office, was installed in the structure, where it remained until the 30s. And the building was converted to a full-fledged inn at that point, with lodging and dining. At that time, their water system was provided by the Glendale Springs, which they pumped up to several holding tanks, and people came in the first and second decades of the century to take the waters. They had small pools there. They felt the waters were medicinal, and I believe they found years later, when they did analysis, that the waters contain minuscule quantities of radioactive barium, which has ministrative qualities on the human body. It tends to make you feel better. Also, one of the reasons we've been able to confirm the addition of these floors is we discovered a piece of original stationery for the Glendale Inn dated May 1902, and it was an order for building materials from Wilkesboro Supply Company for the new additions. This document was discovered between the floorboards of the second floor, and we sent it on to the state. In 1905, Colonel Adams, who had a penchant for remodeling the building, remodeled the structure and added a south wing, a veranda porch, and a second floor balcony which wrapped around the front of the building. In addition, he converted the structure, the design, with the aid of what we understand is an English architect, to a Queen Anne design, making it one of a very limited number of buildings, let alone commercial buildings, that are of the Queen Anne design. It's very rare. Also, he created a tree-lined boulevard leading up to the inn, and established it as at that time, in 1905, through advertising in Nashville and in Raleigh, as a wayside inn for people who wanted to go from the Piedmont to Virginia or Tennessee, or vice versa. At this time, Adams owned almost 10,000 acres surrounding the structure. He dispersed of the remaining acreage, sold it off, and kept about 10,000. And also at that time, the inn was about the only structure in that part of the county. So there was nothing else there. Because of the waters and because of Adams' ability in marketing, the place became a popular spa. And he, from the 1905 until the 20s, a great deal of the traffic and the tourists that visited him came for the medicinal nature of the resort. Let's see. Because of the medicinal value of the springs, the water was for some time bottled and sold during that period, and was distributed across the state of North Carolina to about the Greensboro area, south to the South Carolina line. In 1908, the inn became a circuit courthouse and remained one for over 10 years. Supposedly, from 1905 until the outbreak of the First World War, the inn was at its zenith as a very popular summer resort and way station. Shortly after the First World War, Colonel Adams died, and his widow, Miss M.V. Adams, ran the inn until 1921, when poor health forced her to give it up. She sold the inn and about 2,000 acres of the surrounding land to her brother-in-law, Tam Bowie, who was a notable and very powerful local political figure. Her sister married Tam Bowie, and they had become, of course, close through family ties. Tam Bowie's basic concept was to turn the inn into a major resort area with lots for sale out of the 2,000 acres he purchased. Now, prior to this, Colonel Adams, when he was alive and before he went into the war, had become famous for developing Old Ford, which is down in the Asheville area, and was the first resort of its kind in that part of the state, and helped develop Asheville into a summer resort for Florida residents and for New Yorkers and Mid-Atlantic state residents. It was Bowie's idea and it met with more success than the Ashe County version, which was the Glendale Springs Inn, or the Glendale Inn at that time. Tam Bowie felt that Ashe County had even more to offer than Asheville, and it was his idea, by subdividing these 2,000 acres and setting up a development company and selling off the lots, putting in roads and everything else, that they would be able to not only make a nice profit, but help turn Ashe County into a larger resort than Asheville was. Of course, their start on turning it into a resort was about 15 years later than Asheville. Asheville started to become notable around 1905 to 1910. He was starting in 1925. Okay. In 1925, Tam Bowie formed the Glendale Development Company. He sold stocks to Mr. McNeil, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Barr, and Mr. Gamble. Reputedly, and we don't know this, we can't verify this because our source on it has subsequently died, but a silent partner, he was one of the partners in the development company. A silent partner in this venture was Mr. Robert Doughton, who was the leading congressman in the United States Congress. These men subdivided the property and began the sale of lots. Most of the land sales went to financial institutions and public figures, political figures specifically. Because of the political power wielded by Bowie and supposedly Mr. Doughton, the arm was put on insurance companies and banks to purchase these lots up. Also at that time, Mr. Bowie, who was the Speaker of the House, State House of Representatives, saw to it that Highway 16 was put in, which went right by the inn and led into Jefferson, North Carolina, from the Piedmont. Um, the Depression struck, however, and all but destroyed the development scheme of Bowie's and his people. There was just not enough money around or people with it to take advantage of the inn. Bowie, through his office and political offices, tried to do as much as he could to stimulate it. He had a new Highway 16 put in, which is still known today as Highway 16, which also ran right in front of the inn. And it still did not help. The country was in dire straits and hard times from 1928 until 1935. Still, it served principally as a hotel during that period, with small, short periods as boarding house and a country store and a chapel. In 1932, Bowie and Carl Miller bought out the interests of Barr, McNeil, and Gamble, although Congressman Doughton still was ostensibly connected with the enterprise even after this buyout. In 1934, perhaps the most intriguing historical event took place. This was related to us on two different occasions by two different individuals, both of whom were business colleagues of the Bowies and Doughtons. The newly formed WPA, Public Works Administration, went before Congress requesting approval of the Blue Ridge Parkway project. It was the first project of the WPA to be undertaken by the WPA, and it was to run from Virginia down to South Carolina. As originally planned, the parkway was to traverse Virginia, Tennessee, and then enter North Carolina near Asheville. Doughton, who was the most powerful man in Congress, forced the WPA to change its plans and reroute the parkway through northwestern North Carolina instead of Tennessee, or he would not allow the monies for this project to get out of the House Ways and Means Committee, which he controlled. The WPA fought this move for some time because the costs of going through North Carolina were higher. However, they eventually gave in and, in essence, allowed Doughton to choose the exact route of the parkway. And coincidentally, it runs right next to the inn. As originally, ostensibly, just prior to the route being turned back over to the WPA by Doughton, Doughton and Miller and Tam Bowie met at the inn one night, and they laid out the exact route within a 10-mile vicinity of the inn. As we've been told, the advent of the Blue Ridge Parkway was to have created a rebirth of the Glendale Development Company and the Glendale Inn. Also, in essence, the Glendale Inn was responsible for North Carolina getting the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Yes, yes.
Although most of the activities of Doughton were behind the scenes, there are some intriguing records of floor debates over Doughton's role in this in the congressional record.
Yes, I haven't read that. I haven't read the congressional record on it.
It's there's some really fascinating things. He's called a cheat, a liar, a fraud, and all kinds of stuff. From 1935, let me back up for just a minute. Further, Doughton also persuaded the WPA to utilize the inn as its headquarters for it and its construction companies and the Corps of Engineers during the period of construction. So from 1935 to 1938, the inn was leased from Bowie and Miller, and in parentheses Doughton, by the WPA and the Corps of Engineers. It was used as their headquarters during the parkway's construction. The WPA, at the government's expense, performed during this time extensive restoration and remodeling of the inn. The water tower was torn down and the baths were demolished. A deep water well was dug. It was the first in this part of the state. The shake shingle roof was replaced with a original tin roof, Exterior chimneys were built, cesspools were dug, indoor plumbing was added, an inside kitchen was built, and the